But Tony's actions started to get strange after that. They know that Tony signed into the conference and picked up his name badge, but after that, by his own account, he then drove from Oxford to London to visit Yvette, who was, by Tony's own account, was supposed to have gotten finished with the surgery that was supposed to fix her. But again, by Tony's account, he didn't even like his sister all that much. Why drive to Oxford, sign into the conference, drive all the way back to London, and then back to Oxford? It doesn't make any sense. Hello and welcome to Precontation Points Video Snark. If you came here because you thought that this was an audiobook, please stick around and maybe learn some reading and listening comprehension skills. I read books, discuss what went wrong, and how they can possibly be fixed. I'm continuing my read-through of The Cuckoo's Calling by Robert Galbraith. Now the first video, go check out the others, links are posted below. This book contains harsh scenes that some people might find upsetting. Viewer discretion is advised. Chapter 36. Outside, Strike is kind of surprised to see that Kieran is Sierra's driver for the night. However, aside from looking shocked, Kieran takes on a strictly professional behavior in regards to seeing Strike and hearing that Sierra is taking Strike to the club. Strike redirects Sierra's attention as she tries to sort herself out for the club. He does this by asking about Lula's search for her biodad. Sierra says that it was Lula's ultimate goal to find him. She once thought that she had a solid lead based on something Marlene said, but that it was a dead end. He asked Sierra if the man Lula was searching for could have possibly named Agiman or even Owosu. Sierra laughs and says that Owosu was Somei's original name. His father used to beat him for drawing dresses, and so when he got old enough, he changed his name to distance himself further, which is fair. The outside is swarming with press, and Strike helps Sierra get inside. Once in there, we are friendly introduced to Evan. Sierra explains that Strike is Johnny Rockaby's son, which prompts Evan to ask what Strike does. Evan obviously goes on the offense when Strike explains that he's a PI, but Sierra explains to Evan that Strike is investigating Lula's death. Evan jumps up to get more drinks, which seems like a classic avoidance rather than how Sierra insists that it's ADHD. After this, Evan says that he's bored with the club, so Evan invites both of them back to his place. They wait around for Kieran to bring the car back and then get in. Once in the car, there's a lot of press trying to take their pictures, so Strike tells Kieran to hit the gas, that they'll get out of the way. The front of Evan's building isn't any different, so Strike has to help Evan and Sierra get inside. Inside, we're subjected to Evan and Sierra making weird chit-chat before Sierra asks why Evan went to visit Lady Barstow. He says that he wanted to talk to somebody who, and I quote, gave a shit that Lula was dead. He gets upset over the entire thing, curls up in the chair, and sucks on a cigarette. Evan announces that he's been clean for 5 weeks and 2 days now, which Sierra congratulates him about. He asks Strike if he's going to ask any questions. The first one is, do you think she killed herself or was it murder? Evan says that he's been waiting around this entire time for them to find a note. Then it'll finally feel real, that he was high as a kite for the funeral, which he doesn't even remember. He asks who hired Strike and then gets angry when he finds out that it was John, says that John was obsessed with what Lula spent her money on, emphasis on whose money that it was, that Lula's entire family hated her spending money on people like Evan. Strike asks him to go over the day that Lula died, and he means the entire day because it might give him some clues as to what was going on in her head. Evan said that he knew that Lula had been blowing up his phone with messages, but that he was in the zone with writing a new song. He also thought that she was trying to play her usual mind games with him in demanding to speak with him, but he was also playing back by ignoring her. Evan doesn't know why she would have been also calling Tony at the same time, that Lula hated her uncle, that there was literally nothing that could have connected both Tony and Evan. They didn't have anything in common at all. However, once Evan and Lula were at the club, Lula was apparently too upset that a mysterious other woman named Ellie was there with Evan, that she spent most of her time talking with Sierra. The model says that Lula didn't tell her anything of actual importance while they were there. Evan goes on to explain that a hacker got into both of their phones a bit before her death, that even after they changed their numbers and got new phones, they were careful about what kind of messages that they sent out, that they waited until they saw one another to actually talk. But if Lula had something of actual importance to say to him that night, she sure didn't act like it at the club. Eventually, she put the new bangle he'd given her a week earlier onto the table and stormed off. Evan waited a few minutes before he himself left the club, wearing the wolf head mask to stop the reporters from getting a good shot of him. After that, Evan goes over the facts that Strike and the readers already know. He went to Lula's place but found it swarming with the press, so he went to his drug dealer. After that, he crashed at Sierra's place. That Sierra woke him up to tell him about Lula. However, rehashing all of this is too much for Evan, and he storms off. Sierra asks Strike to be a bit nicer. She doesn't want him to fall off the wagon again. She leaves, and after a bit comes back with Evan. Strike asked what split Evan and Lula up the night she died, that it would help a lot to understand what was going on in her life leading up to her death. Evan gets angry and demands to know how this is going to help find a killer. Strike says that he's only after the truth. Evan eventually snaps that it was the drugs and Lula's family and the press that there was so much pressure on her. He goes on to say that Lula was paranoid and started pushing everybody away. Accused Evan is trying to sell stories to the paper and tipping off the press where they were going to be and when. That it ended up being the person who hacked into their phones, but it still kept happening even after she died. Strike changes the subject and asks about Lula's hunt for her biodad. Evan says that Lula was going to take a course in African studies, that, and I quote, that was going to be daddy, the whole fucking continent of Africa, that it was all Samay's idea. Evan then proceeds to trash talk Samay for a while. There is no love lost between the two men in Lulu's life. When that finally stops, Strike asks Evan why he invited Strike to his apartment and then scowls when Evan tries to deflect. Finally, Evan admits that he was having lunch with Freddie. Freddie got up to pay the bill and left his phone behind. Evan saw Lulu's name, so he started reading. It was a note from Tansy, basically saying that she would spill the beans on something Freddie was up to, that she herself was lying about why she was in a position to see Lulu fall to her death. Since this was a message from Tansy to Freddie, it was more about blackmail and getting more money in the divorce. Sarah is quick to usher Strike out after that. In the car, Strike randomly asks why her purse lining comes out, but she basically says that it's for fashion. She then starts hitting on him, but he's doing everything in his power to try and convince her that she doesn't want to actually sleep with him without actually saying no. At the end of the chapter, he seems like he's kind of into it, though. Chapter 37. The next morning, Robin gets in beyond eager to tell Strike what she'd uncovered the day before. However, she's more than a little surprised to find no evidence of Strike having stayed there overnight. She thinks briefly that maybe Strike went to try and rekindle his relationship with Charlotte. Then she recounts for the reader's how she and Matthew got into a huge fight over her work with Strike. And it's not so much that I disagree with Matthew's perspective over the entire thing. It is kind of odd that his fiancée is working for a man that Matthew doesn't know. His frustration is kind of understandable, but the dude is getting angry over stuff that he knows nothing about and almost seems willing to throw his relationship away over what boils down to a misunderstanding. Shrike comes in and Robin decides that she hates him. She's cold towards him and no longer eager to tell him about what she'd uncovered, which is a stark 180 from 4 pages earlier. Shrek profusely apologizes for his behavior, thanking her for saving him from drunken nonsense, and explains that his ex-girlfriend didn't even wait a month before finding somebody to marry her. Since Lulu had been looking into local African studies program and one Professor Agyeman, Robin went and looked him up. He did 5 years ago, which she was able to get some info from her secretary at the same school, which is also within spitting distance of the British Museum. When Robin shows him a picture of Professor Agyeman, Strike has a reaction. I'm not quite sure what it means, but I'm taking it to mean that the man bears a striking resemblance to Lula. He tells her that she's done a good job. She then says that she took a train to the hotel where Tony had his legal conference the day Lula died. She tried to pretend to be Allison, but Allison had been there before, and the receptionist remembered. Awkward. But Robin thought fast and recounts to Strike how she began to cry, and how she knew that her cheating boyfriend was cheating on her with that strumpet Allison. This got the receptionist to try and calm Robin down, and she said that she remembered Tony having stayed there for about 3 days, that she remembered Tony because he'd made a fuss over having gotten the wrong newspaper, and that was apparently quite memorable for the poor woman. She goes on to explain to Strike that the receptionist told her that Allison came looking for Tony, but that he was supposed to have been at the conference, which they think is odd, since why wouldn't Allison, a secretary at the law firm, not know that Tony was at the conference? But Tony's actions start to get strange after that. They know that Tony signed into the conference and picked up his name badge, but after that, by his own account, he then drove from Oxford to London to visit Yvette, who was, by Tony's own account, was supposed to have gotten finished with the surgery that was supposed to fix her. But again, by Tony's account, he didn't even like his sister all that much. Why drive to Oxford, sign into the conference, drive all the way back to London, and then back to Oxford? It doesn't make any sense. Shrike tries to understand why Tony would have come back. Again, by Tony's own testimony, there was no love lost between the siblings. They briefly considered that John might have asked Tony to pop in, but John never said anything like that. In fact, they're pretty sure that John would have not only known that his coworker and uncle was out of town for the conference, but also not invited him over to begin with. When you add in Allison asking for Tony at the hotel, it keeps getting weirder. This is randomly interrupted by the temp agency Robin works for calling up to try and find her. Those people have some serious boundary issues. At this point, it's going on 2 weeks since Robin last worked for them. Give it up already. Robin uses the interruption to change the topic and ask Shrek what he did yesterday. If there is one small mercy, at least he doesn't verbally tell her. It's all summed up in a single paragraph. After recounting Tansy's attempt to blackmail her husband, Robin asks where Tansy was and what she was doing at the time of Lula's death. Shrek seems to know and encourages Robin to look at the crime scene photos as well as to go over her own memory of her time in Tansy's flat. That it's a detective training exercise. But before we can get into that, Shrek asks her to try Freddy again while he goes to change. This is kind of frustrating, especially since there's so much book left. Shrek clearly knows what happened, yet why is there so much book? Ugh. Later, as Shrek is putting his notes together, Robin asks why he's so meticulous in all of this. He explains to her that if he's not careful about getting all of his proverbial ducks in a row, the opposing counsel might try to say that Shrek isn't a reliable source. Robin goes out to get them lunch and comes back flustered with a newspaper. He and Sierra are on the front page, but the article seems to be of the opinion that Shrek was simply her bodyguard. There's an implication in the article that Sierra and Evan were romantically involved, but Robin knows that Shrek came home wearing the same suit in the photos. She knows he slept with Sierra. Wardle then calls and tells Shrek that they fished a body out from the river with Shrek's card in the pocket. Prediction: it's Rochelle. Chapter 38. If you thought that we'd skip the literal taxi ride Shrek takes as he goes to the morgue, you clearly still have higher hopes than I do for this novel, as well as the act of meeting the medical examiner, walking into the storage room, and the Emmy pulling the shelf from the locker. Getting to the point is for squares. It's not until the end of the second page that we're finally told that it was indeed Rochelle. After telling Wardle and Carver that this is indeed Rochelle, Shrek obviously asks what happened, who found her. She was fished out from the river, and the doctor says that it usually takes 3 weeks for bodies to rise to the surface. Shrek says that she couldn't have been in there for 3 weeks since he talked to her about 2 weeks ago, gave her McDonald's. The doctor says that he'll examine the contents of Rochelle's stomach to confirm how long after her meeting with Shrek that she ended up in the water. Detective Carver is of the opinion that Rochelle is simply another homeless drug addict who jumped off of a bridge to end her suffering. Shrek obviously doesn't think so and wants to examine her hands. This earns him a lot of scorn from Carver, who continues to scoff even after it's confirmed that he knows of Shrek's history with the military. Shrek then reveals the accumulation of things he's been working out since he was put on the case. He knows that neither Lula nor Rochelle jumped, and that he's going to make the 2 detectives look stupid for the press. Lula had determined that Rochelle was the only one who hadn't sold her out, so she brought Rochelle a phone registered under Rochelle's name but paid for by Lula. The paranoia was caused by her recent phone hacking. The day she died, she took Rochelle to a shop to the dressing room and used Rochelle's phone to make a call. He goes on to explain that Rochelle was blackmailing Lula's killer, which is why she ended up in the water. That the police won't be able to find her phone, but scoffs over the idea of it being at the bottom of the river. This is because the killer has it. The officers want to know why Rochelle hadn't sold Lula's story to the press after the death of her friend. This is obviously because she had another source of money, blackmailing the killer. She had enough money to get a super expensive jacket, one that wasn't in shops when Lula died, so Lula couldn't have given it to her. Obviously, being friends with a model means getting early access to things not yet in the shops. Rochelle's jacket isn't exactly the proof that the police want. So Shrek continues on about the paper that Lula had been writing on. He says that the reason why Rochelle was there to witness Lula writing her will, but again, there's no actual proof of any of what Shrek is saying, so they don't believe him. Shrek brings up Tansy, which they again scoff over. However, Shrek is of the opinion that if the police had done their job correctly, that the 4 of them wouldn't be standing over Rochelle's dead body. This pisses Carver off, and he tells Shrek to get out of there. As Wardle is escorting Shrek out, he warns that the killer isn't done cleaning up his mess quite yet, that if the police don't stop the person, more people are going to die. He says that he's going to get proof that Tansy wasn't where she said she was in the next few days. Shrek then asks Wardle to call up Mac and asks about what kind of clothes he'd been given from Samay, that one of the runners on the CCTV footage was wearing a shirt Shrek thinks was stolen from Mac's would-be flat, that the hoodie he was wearing wasn't something anybody can buy in a shop, but something custom-made for the rapper. Shrek hammers in again how more people are going to die if Wardle doesn't act. Chapter 39. The chapter opens with Shrek telling Robin that things are getting too dangerous, that she needs to stay out of this. She obviously protests, but he insists that this is more different than her going to university to ask after a professor who died 5 years ago. He asks her to call John in the morning and tell him about Rochelle's death. In the meantime, he's going to get his interview with Freddy, for real this time. He then thinks back to the last time he saw Rochelle, that she'd left the restaurant and had been on the phone with somebody. Shrek knows that it was the killer, that he lured her out to the river, probably with the promise of food or her alcohol and then pushed her into the water. That the person killed Rochelle too because she was emboldened after having successfully gotten away with murdering Lula. Then Shrek's thoughts turn to a more personal direction. He thinks about how Lucy assumes that he went into the military police because of their dead mother, but he likely would have gone in regardless of the way their mother's life ended. Lita's strike had been half expected to go out the way she had, and much like with Lula's and Rochelle's death, nobody was interested in looking beyond a body full of drugs, needle in her arm, and a drug den. Shrek was the only one who had questions about Lita's death, but everybody else was quick to silence him. His musings done for the chapter, Shrek then calls up a military friend of his in Germany and asks for info about Ajiman. Thanks for listening to my book Snark on YouTube. New videos are up every Monday, but stick around because I sometimes drop random videos on other days too. Just as a reminder, even if you can't financially support me, there are other ways to help me out. The first is watching this video as well as all my other videos. It's also important to like and subscribe. Finally, you can share this video with all of your friends so that they can help as well. If you're already caught up with all of my videos, you can go to Tumblr for my main book, Snark's always free and updated every morning. Newly added to Patreon is to become a member without paying. You'll get access to the same things on Tumblr, but on Patreon. Also new is a 1-week free Patreon trial, so be sure to check that out. Special thanks to Dawn, Phoebe, and Nikki for supporting me on Patreon already. If you want to hear your name in my video next week, either support me on Patreon or make a one-time donation. Do you like my snark so much that you want me to snark your writing? I do that too. For just $6 per chapter, I will tell you how awful that your writing is. But not to worry if you feel like you couldn't take the criticism. I also offer regular book editing as well, just $10 per chapter. You can contact me on any of my social media platforms if you have further questions. If you want to read some of the things that I've written, you can purchase my works on Amazon. I have a slew of spicy short stories and 2 full-length novels. I also frequently run flash sales on my stories, and if you don't follow me on any social media, you might want to do so just so you can know when I might be offering things for free. Links for everything will be posted below. See you next week, guys!